Story 5. Hansel and Gretel, by Jacob Ludwig Grimm and Wilhelm Carl Grimm. Near a great forest there lived a poor woodcutter and his wife and his 2 children. The little boy's name was Hansel, and the little girl's name was Gretel. They had very little to eat or drink, and once, when there was great famine in the land, the man couldn't even get them any bread. As he lay in bed one night, thinking about this, tossing and turning, he sighed heavily and said to his wife, "What will become of us? How can we feed our young children when we can't even feed ourselves?" "I'll tell you what, husband," answered the wife. "We'll take the children into the forest early tomorrow morning to where it's at its thickest. We'll make them a fire, and we'll give each of them a piece of bread. Then we'll go about our work and leave them alone. They'll never find their way home again, and we'll be rid of them." "No, wife," the man said. "I can't do that. I can't find it in my heart to take my 2 children into the forest and leave them there all alone. In no time at all, wild animals would come and eat them up." "Oh, you fool," she said. "In that case, all 4 of us will starve. You'd better get the coffins ready." And she wouldn't leave him in peace until he agreed. "But I really pity the poor children," said the man. The 2 children hadn't been able to sleep because they were so hungry and had heard what their stepmother said to their father. Gretel wept pitifully and said to Hansel, "It's all over for us." "Be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel, "and don't fret. I'll sort something." And when the parents had gone to sleep, he got up, put on his little coat, opened the back door, and slipped out. The moon was shining brightly, and the white pebbles that lay in front of the house glistened like pieces of silver. Hansel bent down and filled the little pocket of his coat with them. Then he went back again and said to Gretel, "Keep calm, dear little sister, and go to bed quietly. God will not forsake us." And he laid down again in his bed. At daybreak, and before the sun had risen fully, the wife came and woke the 2 children, saying, "Get up, you lazy bones. We're going into the forest to cut wood." Then she gave each of them a piece of bread and said, "That's for dinner, and you mustn't eat it before then, because there isn't any more." Gretel carried the bread in her apron, because Hansel had his pockets full of pebbles. Then they all set off together for the forest. When they had gone a little way, Hansel stood still and looked back toward the house, and he did this time and time again, until his father said to him, "Hansel, what are you looking at? Get a move on. "Oh, father," said Hansel, "I am looking at my little white kitten sitting up on the roof, saying goodbye." "You fool," said the woman. "That isn't your kitten. It's the sunshine on the chimney pot." Hansel hadn't been looking at his kitten at all, but rather, every now and then, taking a pebble from his pocket and dropping it on the road. When they reached the middle of the road, the father told the children to collect wood to make a fire to keep them warm, and Hansel and Gretel gathered enough brushwood for quite a fire. They set it alight, and when the flame was burning quite high, the wife said, "Now lie down by the fire and rest, children, and we'll go and cut wood. When we are ready, we'll come and fetch you." So Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and at noon they each ate their piece of bread. They thought their father was in the wood all the time, as they seemed to hear the strokes of the axe. But really, it was only a dry branch hanging from a withered tree that the wind moved back and forth. When they had been there a while, they closed their eyes and fell fast asleep. When at last they woke, it was night, and Gretel began to cry, saying, "How will we ever get out of this wood?" But Hansel comforted her, saying, "Wait a little while longer, until the moon rises, and then we'll easily find our way home." And when the full moon appeared, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the road where the pebbles shone like silver, showing them the way home. They walked all night, and, at daybreak, they came to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the wife opened it and saw it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children! Why did you sleep in the wood for so long? We thought you were never coming home again." But their father was glad, for he was heartbroken at leaving them on their own in the woods. Not very long after that, there was great famine once again in those parts, and the children heard their mother say in bed at night to their father, "Everything's gone. We only have half a loaf, then that's it. The children must go. We will take them further into the wood this time, so that they can't find the way back again. There is no other way for us to manage." The man felt so very sad, and he thought, "The best thing would be to share one's last morsel with one's children." But his wife wouldn't listen to anything he said. She only scolded and reproached him. Whoever says A must say B too, and when a man has given in once, he has to do it a second time. But the children were not asleep and heard the entire conversation. When the parents had gone up to sleep, Hansel got up to go out and get more pebbles, as he had before. But the wife had locked the door, and Hansel couldn't get out. Instead, he comforted his little sister and said, "Don't cry, Gretel. and go to sleep quietly. God will help us." Early the next morning, the wife came and dragged the children out of bed. She gave them each a little piece of bread, less than last time, and on the way to the wood, Hansel crumbled the bread in his pocket, stopping often to throw a crumb on the ground. "Hansel, why are you falling behind? And what are you staring at?" their father asked. "I am looking at my little dove sitting on the roof, saying goodbye to me," answered Hansel. "You fool," said the wife. "That isn't a dove. It's the morning sun shining on the chimney pots." Hansel went on as before and scattered breadcrumbs all along the road. The woman led the children far into the wood, somewhere they'd never been before in their lives. And again, there was a huge fire, and the mother said, "Sit still there, you children, and when you're tired, you can go to sleep. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and this evening, when we are ready to go home, we'll come and fetch you." So, when noon came, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, who had scattered his along the road. Then they went to sleep, and evening came and went, and no one came for the poor children. They woke when the night was really dark, and Hansel comforted his little sister, saying, "Wait a little, Gretel, until the moon gets up. Then we'll find the way home by following the crumbs of bread I've scattered along the road." They got up when the moon rose, but they couldn't find any crumbs, because the birds from the woods and fields had come and picked them up. Hansel thought they might find the way home anyway, but they couldn't. They went on all night, and the next day, from morning until evening, but they couldn't find the way out of the wood, and they were very hungry. They had eaten nothing but a few berries they'd been able to find. And when they were so tired that they couldn't longer drag themselves any further, they lay down under a tree and fell asleep. It was now the third morning since they had left their father's house. They kept trying to get back home, but instead, they kept finding themselves deeper in the wood, and they would have starved if help hadn't soon come their way. At about noon, they saw a pretty snow-white bird sitting on a bough and singing so sweetly that they stopped to listen. And when he finished, the bird spread his wings and flew in front of them, so they followed after him until they came to a little house. The bird perched on the roof, and when they came nearer, they saw that the house was built of bread, the roof from cakes, and the window was pure sugar. "Let's have some of this," said Hansel, "and eat well. I'll eat a piece of the roof. Gretel, you can have some of the window. That'll taste sweet." So Hansel reached up and broke off a bit of the roof, just to see how it tasted, and Gretel stood by the window and chewed it. Then they heard a thin voice call out from inside. "Nibble, nibble like a mouse. Who is nibbling at my house?" And the children answered, "Don't worry, it's the wind." And they went on eating, without pausing for breath. Hansel, who found that the roof tasted very nice, took a great piece of it off, and Gretel pulled out a large round window pane and sat down to eat it. Then the door opened, and an old woman came out, leaning on a crutch. Hansel and Gretel felt very frightened and dropped what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said, "Ah, my dear children, how do you come to be here? You must come inside and stay with me. You won't be any trouble." So she took each of them by hand and led them into her little house. And there they found a good meal laid out: milk and pancakes, sugar, apples, and nuts. After that, she showed them 2 little white beds, and Hansel and Gretel laid themselves down on them and thought they were in heaven. Despite her kind behavior, the old woman was a wicked witch. She used to lie in wait for children and had built the little house on purpose to entice them in. When they were inside, she would kill them, cook them, and eat them, and it was a feast day for her. The witch's eyes were red, and she couldn't see very far, but she had a keen sense of smell, like animals, and knew very well when human beings were nearby. When she sensed that Hansel and Gretel were coming, she gave an evil laugh and said triumphantly, "I've got them, and they won't escape from me." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she got up to look at them, and while they slept peacefully with round, rosy cheeks, she said to herself, "What a fine feast I shall have." Then she grasped Hansel with her withered hand and led him to a little stable, shutting him in behind a grating. Call and scream as he might, it did no good. Then she went back to Gretel and shook her, crying, "Get up, lazy bones! Fetch water and cook something nice for your brother. He's outside in the stable and has to be fattened up. And when he is fat enough, I'll eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was no use. She had to do what the wicked witch told her to do. And so, the very best food was cooked for poor Hansel, while Gretel was given nothing but crab shells. Each morning, the old woman visited the little stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out your finger so that I can tell if you'll soon be fat enough." Hansel, however, used to hold out a little bone, and the old woman, who had poor eyesight, couldn't see what it was, and, believing it to be Hansel's finger, wondered very much why it wasn't getting any fatter. After 4 weeks, where Hansel seemed not to be getting any fatter at all, she lost patience and decided not to wait any longer. "Now then, Gretel," she shouted at the little girl, "fetch water quickly. Whether Hansel is fat or lean, tomorrow I must kill and cook him." His poor little sister cried, and the tears flowed down her cheeks. "Dear God, pray help us," she cried. "If we'd been devoured by wild beasts in the wood, at least we would have died together." "Stop whining," said the old woman. "It won't work." Early next morning, Gretel had to get up, make the fire, and fill the kettle. "We'll bake the bread first," said the old woman. "I've heated the oven already and kneaded the dough." She pushed poor Gretel towards the oven, from which the flames were already leaping. "Get inside," said the witch, "and see if it's really hot enough to bake the bread." The witch intended to shut her in and bake her once she was in there. Then she would have eaten her as well. But Gretel had worked out what she intended and said, "I don't know how to get in." "Stupid goose," said the old woman. "The opening is big enough, don't you see? I could get in it myself." And she bent down and put her head in the oven's mouth. Then Gretel gave her a push so that she went in further, then quickly shut the iron door behind her and put the bar across. Oh, how frightfully she howled! But Gretel ran away and left the wicked witch to burn miserably. Gretel went straight to Hansel, opened the stable door, and cried, "Hansel, we are free! The old witch is dead." Then Hansel flew out like a bird from its cage as soon as the door is opened. They were overjoyed. They hugged each other and danced and jumped about. And as they had nothing more to fear, they went back into the old witch's house, and everywhere they looked, they found chests of pearls and precious stones. "This is better than pebbles," said Hansel, as he filled his pockets, and Gretel, thinking she'd also like to carry something home with her, filled up her apron. "Now, away we go," said Hansel, "and let's get out of this enchanted forest." After traveling for a few hours, they came upon a big river. "We can't cross this," said Hansel. "I can't see any stepping stones or a bridge." "And there's no boat either," said Gretel. "Here comes a white duck, though. If I ask her, she'll help us over." So she shouted, "Duck, little duck, we're here, Hansel and Gretel, without stepping stones or a bridge. Please carry us over on your nice white back." So the duck came over, and Hansel got up on her and told his sister to come too. "No," answered Gretel. "That would be too hard for the duck. We can go separately, one after the other." So that was how it happened, and after that, they went on happily until they came to a wood, and the path became more and more familiar, until at last they saw their father's house in the distance. Then they ran up to it, rushed in at the door, and fell into their father's arms. He hadn't known a moment's peace since he'd left his children in the wood, and his wife was now dead. When Gretel opened her apron, the pearls and precious stones scattered all over the room, and Hansel took one handful after another out of his pocket. And from then, their worries were over, and they lived together very happily. The end.